With a yo-ho-ho, it's TaleOfTheToaster making some more content about Inazuma 11 Orion, the least covered season of Inazuma 11 on this channel, but we're changing that right here by taking all of the hissatsu techniques in which I previously made a tier list video ranking them on my personal opinion. This one, it's not about what I think of them. There'll be equal treatment to my favourites and my least favourites. This one is purely about the idea of giving them dub names, because Orion, along with Galaxy, was the only season of Inazuma 11 to never receive an English translation. And we know that Inazuma 11 likes to come up with silly, funny names for all of its characters and its special moves that kind of suits the English language a bit more. Even Galaxy, we found out what the English move names were in the end, at least for the ones that made it to the anime, because they were in the Portuguese dub. But when it comes to Orion, we know nothing. Yeah, so some pretty remarkable timing then. Literally 1 week after I recorded this video, we have found an ongoing Portuguese dub of Inazuma 11 Orion. It hasn't even finished airing yet, but within the 10 or so that have already aired on TV up to the point of the Australia match ending, we do in fact now have dub names for the Orion moves and characters. Like, for example, Ichihoshi Mitsuru was localized to Philip Starr. Patrick Starr kind of vibe, but okay. The moves, however, have actually got, generally speaking, very good dub names and very in line with the official dubs. However, this video, I didn't want to scrap it just because we are in fact getting an official dub after all. At least in Portuguese, which always shares the same names as the English video. So consider this maybe a predictions video, even if some of them we already know the answers to at this point. And basically, when Orion has finished airing in Portuguese, we'll come back to this topic and I will compare my dub names to the official ones and the Japanese ones in between. I'm going to try and keep these in line with the canon style of coming up with a load of puns or some alliterative names or stuff that just sounds a bit silly. So if you're not a fan of dub names in the general sense, you might not necessarily like these either, but we're going to give it a go. For most of them, this video would go on forever if we came up with brand new dub names for literally every move in Orion. There's genuinely loads of them. So these are the following moves that I believe should stay the same. Diamond Ray, Last Resort, including its Dragon and Sigma variants. Firewall, Penguin the God and Devil. This is a very awkward name that I kind of would have liked to change, but you also kind of can't. It's discovered by accident. They're trying to individually do Penguin the God and Penguin the Devil. It's kind of meant to be an awkward name, so I think I had to keep it. Time Trance, Requiem Dust, Artemis Ring, The Forgotten Sonata, Red Hot Chili Meteor, The Asura, Super God Hand, Diamond Arm, Diamond Edge, Diamond Punch, The Shelter, Innocent Drive, Margin the Wave, Blue Stardust, Carnival Shake, Emperor Penguin No. 2 featuring Shark, Sunrise Blitz, Runaway Chariot, Orion Cross Viper, Perseus Orb, and Super Megaton Head. Those are the ones that I don't feel really warrant changing. They could change. There were a lot of moves in Go Galaxy, for instance, where when I was working on the fan translation, we said, no, we can keep that name the same as Japanese, and then we found the Portuguese dub and it completely changed anyway. But if I was in charge of localizing Orion, those are the names I would keep. Now here's the ones that I would change. First one would be Bison Horn. I wouldn't change this too much. The name I came up with was Barging Bison. I also spoke with Zikria AK, who had also done this process before. He shared me some of his dub name ideas, and I did like his for this move. He called it Seeing Red. Likewise, only minor changes to Kamikaze Buffalo Train. I've just shortened this to Buffalo Express. Finally, to complete the South Korea moves, Red Break doesn't really give us anything as a name, so even visually there isn't much to base it on other than that it's a curve shape, but that is why I called it Crimson Curve. However, this is another one where after speaking to Zikria, I will admit he had a better idea than I did, and he called it Backburner, which, not to do myself down, but is probably one of the best names in the video, to be honest. For Nathan's move Spinning Fence, I'm not really sure why it's called Spinning Fence, so I just kind of changed it completely. We've had Cyclone, we've had Cyclone with a PSY, so now let's have the Triclone. Well, just Triclone, not the Triclone. Though if you want something a bit more serious, V Palamedes25 in the comments of my tier list also suggested Vacuum Wall, which I think sounds pretty nice. The next one I feel is pretty difficult. Maximum Circus, belonging to Caleb Stonewall, is one that they could keep, but it feels similar to a lot of those surface level, we're going to make it sound cool, like Extreme Rabbit kind of moves that the dub does end up changing. One suggestion from Zikria, for instance, was The Circus is in Town. I wanted to go for something a little bit shorter, and I'm not too sure if I'm necessarily happy with it. At the end of the day, we can just keep Maximum Circus if we want. But the angle I went with was Jester's Privilege, which is a statement that refers basically not only to a literal jester, which the whole circus thing is implying, but also somebody who can kind of say whatever they want and get away with it, even if they're being mean or if they sound like they're joking. They kind of do it so frequently that people don't take it that seriously. And that kind of is Caleb Stonewall in a nutshell, especially in this series where he's not the major threat anymore. He can just kind of abuse Jester's privilege and say whatever he wants, and no one will really react, so that could be the move. Back to a simpler one then, Sun's Guillotine I've softened down a bit to Solar Scythe. Then we get to Fujin Rajin Ghost, where our hands are kind of tied, because although Orion never had an English dub, Inazuma 11 Aries did. This is an evolution on a move that was called Fujin Rajin, which means God of Lightning and God of Wind, basically. But the dub just kind of said, we can't figure out how to translate that, we're just going to call it Mega Margin. And that was a little bit disappointing because it's completely lost the meaning, but we still have to treat Aries itself as canon, and therefore we have to build upon Mega Margin here. In the end, I just went with Mega Margin Ghost to change as little as possible. You could go with Mega Margin Phantom or something like that, but we couldn't have a good name for this one, so I might as well keep it simple. I did say I wasn't going to express my opinion on the moves too much, but Death Crusher Zone is one of the ones I kind of like the least in Orion. I forget about it every single time, and that's because it doesn't look too different to any kind of regular Death Zone. It's just done out of a Polar Pike as an override, and there's no real meaning to Death Crusher Zone. There's also not much freedom to change it either, because it's still got to have Death Zone in there, but one thing that I feel Aries and Orion kind of missed out on a bit is taking advantage of the fact this is an alternate timeline that effectively replaces Season 2 and 3. If you think of God Knows Impact, for instance, on Aphrodite, that's a brand new animation and it looks great, but it doesn't need to have its own name, in my opinion, when it could have just been the Aries version of Godbreak, the natural successor to God Knows that Season 2 gave us. So, although the dub in the end called it God Alone Knows, I probably would have just called it Godbreak to call it the same move, just in a different world. Therefore, with Death Crusher Zone, I think the one thing I can kind of do to justify the existence of such a forgettable move is actually to make it the Orion version of Death Zone 2. So that's a move that exists in Season 2, and it's not too dissimilar. Like, you're losing all of the spinning and stuff, but this could just be called Death Zone 2 and consider it the same move but in another life. But if you don't like that and you do want an original name for it, then I would probably call it Death Volley, just to, instead of Death Zone 2, I would tie it into Hizaki's Penguin Volley, because Hizaki is part of the move, so then it's kind of 2 in 1 still, but it's actually original. Perhaps one of the moves most in need of a dub name is Moonlight Circle Swallow Return, with a dash in the middle. That is a heck of a name, Heathmore. I'm not sure where you came up with that one, but it needs shortening. You could take it the serious angle and just call it something like Moonlight Cut, Moonlight Slash, to just go as simple as you can. But I decided we haven't had a pun name in a while, so I'm going to call it Past and Crescent. You can either spell it as the word past, P-A-S-T, or the more footballing past, ending in a D, but it's a crescent-shaped move, and I wanted to make a pun on time, because moonlight, you can't just call it Moonlight Crescent, because that's the same thing, so take it or leave it, Past and Crescent. I also came up with a pun name for Dynamic Corona, because again, we could keep Corona in there because it is literally the sun's corona. They came up with the move before a certain outbreak, but by the time it can have its first appearance in a video game like Victory Road, it's kind of on the forefront of our minds. So I've said, let's just change it completely. I'm going to call it Check Your Pulsar, or Pulsar Check. And if you want it to be a little bit less of a joke, you can call it Pulsar Purge. Burning Hinotori, or Burning Phoenix. This is a move that overlaps with a move called The Phoenix in the same season. They're both flaming, they're extremely similar. This to me is an opportunity to use the dub name to differentiate them. So I had a hard rule for this and I said, Burning Phoenix cannot have the word Phoenix in it. However, the move still is visually a phoenix, so we still have to reference it. That's why I've called it From the Ashes. You could call it a Conchita Wurst reference, but it's mainly just the general reincarnation of a phoenix. I also had an alternative one in the same vein called We Rise Again. And I think either of those two would make it considerably cooler than unrelated phoenix move number 3. This brings us into the moves that were used by China's team, and basically I have changed them all. I kind of like what the Japanese names were going for in terms of how literal they are when you actually know a little bit more about the Chinese language. I used to run a wiki about a Chinese show called King of Bots, and you found that the Chinese robots themselves had really literal names with like lots and lots of words in them. It was the complete opposite of how they were for the English language competitors. So I do feel that all of these overly verbose ones like Explosive Devouring Lion and Dragon God's Iron-Ribbed Fan, they are actually fitting within Asia to reference the Chinese style, but in a dub we do need to change them all completely. So in order, Sky Falcon's Bullet I have called Acroblast because of the acrobatics that happened before it. Heaven and Earth Fisher, one of the moves that I've realised from my tier list people actually love, which I appreciate because I didn't realise it was as popular as it is. I'm just going to shorten that to Sky Fisher. Explosive Devouring Lion can be Lion's Feast. And my favourite one, Dragon God's Iron-Ribbed Fan thing, can be Fan the Flames. Next is one that I was really looking forward to tackling and actually struggled with quite a lot, because Fire Lemonade Rising never left the best impression on me. I'm someone who loves the Hissatsu Fire Lemonade, the normal version, and then I was glad to see it get an upgrade, but Fire Lemonade Rising didn't really mean anything to me. But I also respect that we can't change it too much, because although I'm mainly bearing this with an English dub of Inazuma 11 Victory Road in mind, you've also still got to imagine that if the Orion season did suddenly get an English dub, it's never going to happen, but as a what if, you can't just replace the lines entirely. He has to say Fire Lemonade, oh, and then do the motion, and then later come back with the Rising! So basically we just need a word to swap with Rising, but maybe something that's a little less literal. I struggled a lot, but one of the commenters, Ted Brower, came up with a good idea. So in his suggestion he called it Fire Lemonade Zero Sugar, which is like a variant on a lemonade, but it is also something that genuinely makes it lighter. I shortened it a little bit. If you look around brands like Pepsi and Dr. Pepper and all that, usually you get the idea that something is zero sugar if it's just called Dr. Pepper Zero or Coca-Cola Zero before they then extended that name. So basically, you maybe need the explanation a little bit, but I'm calling it Fire Lemonade Zero. Shark the Deep is a pretty easy one to work with. I know a lot of different people who wanted to simply translate it as Shark Attack, and that's all you really need, really. But also, if you want to really keep the deep sea aspect, then you can just call it Deep Sea Shark, which, funnily enough, is one of the names of the Chinese robots in King of Bots, which helped to teach me about the Chinese language. Funny how that comes as a roundabout thing. For the next one, it's hard to say if I'm even localizing it at all, because the wiki would tell you that there is a move called the Boyon, and that's kind of how the goalkeeper says it as well. But then if you read the subtitles when you're watching the episode, they will usually call it the Bubbles. I really like this move, and to be honest, I think it probably should stay as the Bubbles. It just gives the right vibe. But if you do want to give it a different name anyway, just to put it beyond doubt, I wanted to make sure that it didn't clash too much with Bubble Trouble, the move from Go Galaxy, which was originally Bubble Boil in Japanese. Both of those are kind of a reference to Bubble Bubble, Toil and Trouble, but we haven't actually had a move that's just called Bubble Bubble. I don't think it's that much of a clash really to have both Bubble Trouble and Bubble Bubble, or you could have Bubble Over. I can imagine it's a little bit unpopular that I've even raised this one, to be honest. Glacial Gungnir is one of the coolest moves in the whole series, and I have huge respect for it. I think the only problem with it is that it's got the word Gungnir in there in the same season that Dave Quagmire, Saginuma, is on the team. Yes, he's a goalkeeper, he's not going to be using Gungnir, but he still, in theory, probably could. So I don't want to overwrite him like that within his own season. Therefore, I had a closer look at the motions, and the way I see it, this is the true combination of Sean and Aiden's personalities. When they did, say, double blizzard, triple blizzard, whatever they are, that was just two players doing Eternal Blizzard, whereas this is tapping more into Aiden's legendary wolf style and Sean's ice theme. In particular, the pose that Sean does at the start of it, the whole rah, is the exact same as Legendary Wolf from Season 2. So what I want to do in this timeline where Legendary Wolf was never actually a move in Ares or Orion, I want to combine Legendary Wolf with Eternal Blizzard and call it Legendary Blizzard. Twin Lancer is another move that kind of sounds good anyway without really needing to change it, but I would say that the Ares dub forced my hand a little bit because Nosaka's move, King's Lance, was dubbed to Royal Lancer. I don't want to have Royal Lancer and Twin Lancer on completely different teams. So I decided here, looking at the very limited visuals of the move that we have to work with and the name Lancer, I wanted to dive into a fencing theme. The trouble is, I don't know anything about fencing, so I did some googling and I came up with something appropriate, but you're going to have to let me read my notes here, because I'm going to call it either Twin Coppertino or Twin Flankenade, depending on what's more accurate of a fencing term, because there's essentially something you can do in fencing called a croisé, where your blade kind of goes from the top right to the bottom left to cross someone up, which is what Twin Lancer is doing, but then from the croisé you can have the more specific terms of Coppertino and Flankenade. I'm not going to bore you with the actual fencing terminology of which one's more appropriate, but if anyone in the comments actually knows about fencing, you can let me know. Carronade Cannon is another weird one, because Carronade is the name of a cannon, and then adding cannon onto that is just kind of redundant, but you don't want to also just leave it as Carronade, because then that's not even a dub name, that's just the name of what it is. But you also don't want to change it too much, especially because the guy that uses it on the Navy Invaders, he will always kind of say, Carronade du Cannon, Cobra, with Cobra being himself. So that part needs to stay, but it also needs to not be part of the name. So I just took an easy way out and called it Great Carronade. Their goalkeeper is also tricky because he's got Military Satellite Phobos, which I think is great already, but it's very long. It's not really a problem in the anime where they can just say as much as they like, but when you're in the video games and they don't all have unique text for each move, I think Military Satellite Phobos would be quite hard to fit in. But I don't want to lose the name Phobos, because then if you just call it Satellite Strike, for instance, you no longer know what the satellite's called. And I think it's cool that they did actually give it a name. It might even be a reference to a real one. But basically I think because it's military, you're kind of allowed to get away with codifying it a bit. So what I did was call it SLR Phobos, which is a real term for satellite laser ranging Phobos. Or if you do want a more jokey one, then you can just make a Star Trek joke and call it Beam Me Down. Another one I really want to change is GGG Senjo no Aria. This is a move which visually is really cool and it's done by some great characters, but I lost interest in it before the move had even finished because the name was just so ridiculous. I get it now, now that it's been explained. The GGG is like God, Golem, God for Aphrodite, Xavier and Cliff, who doesn't even call himself a golem in the dub anyway, so it has to change regardless. The rest of it is like a reference to the music Air on G string, but I'm saying forget the original meaning, we're changing it completely. At the end of the day, it's about the blend of gods in heaven and whatever, and the earth. So, similar to Skyfisher when you put it that way, but a bit more emphasis on the heaven. So I'm going to call it Move Heaven and Earth. Because I would move heaven and earth to score a goal for this team. What Xavier can say that one. A lot of really important ones in a row as well, because now we're getting to Over Cyclone, my favourite move in the whole of Orion, top 3 lifetime. I had to have a real good think about this because it's not one where I just want to give it a silly jokey dub name. It has to sound cool, but if it was meant to sound like Last Resort, then they would have done that with the original name. By calling it Over Cyclone, it's clearly meant to be different, even though it looks like a rip-off. So I don't want to borrow any of the Last Resort naming for this either. But it's still got to be something sensible, like commenter Zephas, for instance, was calling it Nature's Wrath, which I kind of like. But I want him to be able to scream it when he's kicking the ball. So I called it Tropical Storm, which is essentially what a cyclone actually is. And I feel like by removing cyclone from it, when we're giving Nathan Swift Triclone, for instance, and all of the previous cyclones, yeah, there's obviously been a lot of storms, but Tropical Storm as he goes and kicks the ball. I could see that working, and like the over, why was it called Over Cyclone? I don't actually get it. Russia's goalkeeping move, Take a Pinch, actually makes a lot of sense as it is, but I feel like we can swap it for something even more natural. I've got 2 suggestions. One would be In a Pinch, and the other would be Pinch Point. So let me know what you think is better. Based on the fact that I kept Innocent Drive, that means Russia's other move would be Double-Headed Eagle, which might be the most boring name that Inazuma's ever come up with. It sure is a double-headed eagle. It's based on Russia's coat of arms. Obviously, they will call it the double-headed eagle. Within that, it doesn't have like a particular name. I did some research on the coat of arms to see if it had a particular name. Indeed, when Zikria was coming up with a name for it, he actually played off the word coat of arms itself and called it coat of wings, which makes some sense. But what I did was look into who created the coat of arms itself, and it was a former ruler called Ivan III, and rather than being a king, his actual title was to be a Tsar, T-S-A-R. Basically, I took that word and put it in the move and called it Tsarstruck. It's like Starstruck, but spelled wrong. But this one was really hard, so please help. Next is Death Samba, and I've criticised the move before for being yet another Samba move, but we can't change the move itself. All we can change is the name, so Samba obviously has to be in there. We all know the dub wouldn't keep the word death, they only ever did that for Death Zone. Anything else that's ever had death in it has gotten changed. And I wanted to make it as bombastically different from Samba Strike as we could, so I leaned into the actual Portuguese language a little bit and called it Samba de Extreme, or Samba de Extrema, to use the actual Portuguese spelling of the word. Big challenge coming up next because we have Kamakura D, short for Kamakura Dimension. I love that the move is a combination of 3 of my favourite characters, 1 being a goalkeeper and 2 being defenders, but the name means nothing to me. It's named after a Japanese snow festival, apparently. Not even the wiki is too confident that that's the actual origin, because nothing about the move resembles a snow festival in any way. What it resembles is crystals and diamonds. We definitely don't want to create another diamond move here, so I stuck to the crystal side. Then I thought, what do we put with crystal? Well, if I think about less what the goalkeeper's doing and more bring attention to the fact that the defenders are involved, because I think that's one of the main problems that comes as of the move being called Kamakura D. You don't know what the defender's role is. My theory is that it's built up using Mizukamiya's Zone of Pentagram, which in Ares was officially localized as Akarise's move, Containment Field. That made me want to keep the word field and add it onto crystal, because then crystal field is also like a genuine area of theory anyway. It sounds a little boring in the end, just calling it crystal field, but it does have a lot of meaning to it if you think about it. Otherwise, if you want to make a joke, Zikria called it Dimension, which sounds great out loud as a diamond and dimension joke, but it doesn't look so great written down. Next we've got the GOAT! It is time for macaroni spaghetti, and you all know I couldn't change it too much because this move is so ridiculous, it makes us all laugh. It would be criminal to change it in a way that just reinvents it entirely. So I've kept macaroni, but instead of macaroni spaghetti, which is unbelievably literal, that is a descriptor, not a name, I made a little pun on macaroni cheese by calling it macaroni squeeze. Squeezes the ball, you know, but with extra sauce is absolutely intact. It goes from macaroni spaghetti with extra sauce to macaroni squeeze with extra sauce. Unbalanced pizza is also comedically literal. I've gone with another one. You could have a longer or a shorter version. I would say my longer name for it would be Leaning Power of Pisa instead of Leaning Tower of Pisa, but you could also just call it Power of Pisa. Mouth of Truth is also a real thing in Italy. If I look up the Italian name, it's a real thing in Rome called the Bocca della Verità, which literally translates to Mouth of Truth. So you certainly can keep the name Mouth of Truth, it's definitely accurate. But at the same time, much as it's probably impossible with copyright, one suggestion by Zikria was Rolling Stone. I just wanted to use it, to be honest. Tricerashield is also a little bit on the nose, but you can't lose the Triceratops part. I just called it Tricerablock to sound a little bit like Triceratops. And then we get to the final match, the same one that had the likes of Orion Cross Viper and Perseus Orb that I couldn't be bothered changing, but there are some that really needed it. Namely, first two, you've got both Black Shield and Black Field. Both of these sound pretty good. I think I don't know if Inazuma would be quite likely to just keep black as the only descriptor of it. They'd probably go for something a bit more in-depth. But I also want to try and separate the two moves from each other as they do sound very similar. So these are in no way jokes or named after anything. They're just kind of the first edgy names that cropped into my mind. But for Black Shield, I called it Infinite Darkness. And for Black Field, I called it Endless Fury. And the last of the unbelievably literal names is God Hand of Friendship. But this one is important to keep the cringe factor, because it is a move that Mark Evans just announced as being God Hand in the match, and then he actually comes up with the twist after it completes the save that, oh, this was no regular God Hand. I've not really got a name for it, but I guess I'd call it, I don't know, God Hand of Friendship, because it's about my friends. This is like a name that Mark himself had come up with, and it's got to include the friendship, and it's got to be cringe, but it's definitely got to be shorter than God Hand of Friendship. Thankfully that's very easy, and I called it Our God Hand, which to be honest might not even be cringe enough. I kind of unironically like it, to be honest. I kept Super Megaton Head the same, but Inazuma Break Code Great has to change, because this is a move that is already struggling to justify its own existence. Back in the tier list video I said, at least they're now like kicking really from above instead of, you know, outwards. It's now like down. And then Airy in the comments pointed out, no, it's literally the same animation as Inazuma Break from Reloaded. It's just got different lighting, and they say Code Great. So it's like even less original than I thought. Therefore I dipped into my Death Crusher Zone becomes Death Zone 2 kind of mentality, and I wanted to kind of retroactively repudiate its status as a full move. So I'm not completely getting rid of it. It's getting its own original name, but I'm choosing to combine it with another move that it kind of looks like anyway. Namely, the fact that it's initiated by Jude, it's purple, and it's got dark lighting, and it's 3-person, means it's almost just as much Death Zone as it is Inazuma Break, and those moves were always kind of parallels to each other anyway. So to justify Code Great's existence, I want to merge them into one move and call it Inazuma Break Zone. We've got 2 left, and Sword of d'Artagnan. How do I say Sword of d'Artagnan? Whenever I saw that in the Orion episode, I would forget it literally as soon as it had finished, because I did not know who d'Artagnan was, and it was just another sword move of which we've had enough. Upon googling it for this video, apparently d'Artagnan is one of the 3 musketeers, which makes it even more weird, because the 3 musketeers are known for using like rapier swords, and this looks more like a regular sword. It just looks like Odin's sword, but 3 people, to be honest. But if we overlook that part and find a way to name it after the 3 musketeers in a way that everyone could understand, I called it Musketeers Malice. Because I really, really held myself back on alliterative names when I was coming up with these. I figured I'd have too many. In the end, I probably didn't have enough. And finally, we've got one that again doesn't really need to change, but it's Ichihoshi's move Planet Break. I had a lot of suggestions for this one in the comments as well. There was stuff like Star Destroyer or Star Stream. I would either say keep Planet Break because it's fine, but the dub did usually replace the word break with something else, or I wanted to make some kind of pun based on the core of the planet, because that's where you're kicking it to. So I wanted to somehow involve hardcore. It maybe even could just be called hardcore as 2 words, or you could apply something else before or after it. I couldn't actually come up with anything good enough in the end, so consider it Planet Break or hardcore, but I'd also really like some more suggestions for that one in the comments if you do think it should change at all. But with that, we've named every move in Orion unless we deliberately tried to keep its Japanese name. So thank you to everyone who helped me come up with those names. They were still mostly mine at the end of the day, but it was good having some suggestions from the commenters as well to put alongside it. Let me know what you would name some of these moves down below, both the ones I did and didn't name. And let's also not forget the fact that all of these pretty much were shots and goalkeeping moves. I think there were 2 dribbling moves and 4 defensive moves in the whole of Orion, which is insane. But thank you for watching. I don't know if there'll be more Orion content, to be honest. It definitely doesn't need the full 40-part episode reviews, but if there's something else you want to hear in terms of my opinion about Orion, I'm kind of riding a high with it at the moment, so let me know and I might consider it. TTFN.